and lots of good stuff. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Very cool.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It is October 12th. This is Seeking Sustainability Live number 118. And we have Derek Wessman with us. Derek, thanks for joining.
Hey, everybody.
Now, Derek, your main thing is translation interpreting, but I know you from following all your Twitter. You are also on a Japanese TV show.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's been a long time in Japan, but can you give us a short summary of yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to do it quickly. So, uh, I came to Japan in 1998 for the first time. I was a Mormon missionary, and I'm not Mormon anymore. But that's how I ended up here. I spent the 2 years that they spend here. I went back to the US. I was a tour guide for Japanese people in Las Vegas until 9/11. And then I interpreted for Japanese politicians and other people at the Salt Lake City 2002 Olympics. I'm from Salt Lake City. And then I came back to Japan in 2004 to study politics, and I worked for a Japanese politician. And then I started my company in 2009. And that company started out with translation and interpreting as the main thing. And now I also do that while consulting for medical device companies, helping them with compliance and quality control.
Wow. Quite a variety. I had no idea you came over as a Mormon missionary at
Yeah,
first.
yeah. That's a whole
That's
bottle of
wild.
wax.
So
Yeah.
my husband, when he was teaching English, one of the schools he had to teach at, he had to wear a tie and he had to cycle, so he sometimes wore a helmet. And people
Oh
were
no.
like, "Are you a missionary?" That's the uniform, right?
It is the uniform. That was me in 98 to 2000 in Tokyo area.
Wow.
Exactly.
Your translation interpreting, I read a really interesting interview with you, and you're talking about how you really like the fact that translation interpreting is a way to enhance the value of experiences, relationships, events. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the way I see interpreting and translation, and the way I keep interested in it is that it's always an opportunity to learn a new field. So unless you're always translating the exact same kind of thing or interpreting the same kind of thing, you end up having to learn new fields all the time. And so it's this really demanding but really interesting challenge. So I really like that. And plus, with that interview that you saw, I think the main point for me was you learn all these things, interpreting and translating, and sometimes those things can become in and of themselves a pursuit, and that's what it is with medical device consulting for me. I interpreted so many inspections by FDA inspectors of Japanese companies that I learned all the FDA rules really well, and so I now go into factories and I do the inspection so they can learn what's wrong with their system and how they can improve. Yeah, so it's
Wow.
just been this really fun thing about that.
That's interesting. And you have a quote here where you say, "More than anything, though, embarrassment was and remains my greatest teacher. When I
Oh man.
mess up, it hurts. It's hard to forget."
Yeah, exactly. Man, I don't learn. I learn by experience. I'm one of those people as opposed to being able to like just study in a book. But when I mess up something, especially learning Japanese, you never learn a language 100%, right? So you're always even a native, so to speak, speaker of a language is never 100% in the they don't have 100% understanding of their language. So same thing with being really fluent in Japanese, but still always learning new things. When I screw something up and somebody corrects me, that's like the best way to never forget it again.
Yeah, but you have
That
to,
experience.
you also have to have a thick skin and not take it too personally, too, right?
Yeah, but I do take it really, I guess I'm an insecure short man, right? So, short white man who could be more insecure. So I take it super hard if I mess something up. But it's a good thing, right? Keeps you humble, keeps you and it helps you to remember it.
Yeah,
So it's good.
awesome. Erin, thanks for joining. Erin says, in my experience, the second language and translation opens up even a second identity for the self. Do you find that?
Definitely. Absolutely. I mean, I try to I have a need to please people, and so in Japanese, I've naturally become, I think, almost obsequious. Like, just really, uh, I really want the people I'm working with to be comfortable and um, to trust me as an interpreter. You know, they have to trust you immediately, otherwise, your interpreter, your value will be limited. So, um, I've developed probably a personality that's more like more needy or more needs to get the approval of people in Japanese, perhaps. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of identity that gets wrapped up in language for sure.
And you mentioned that one of your most important jobs was working the Olympics in Salt Lake.
Yeah, well, that was a really influential thing for me. I was a tour guide for in Las Vegas, like I mentioned, and then 2001, 9/11 happened, and immediately the tourist industry just disappeared. So I went back to my native Salt Lake and I was doing a little bit of tour guiding, but then the Olympics came, and because I could speak Japanese enough, they had me interpret for the mayor of Salt Lake, who met with the mayor of Matsumoto, Japan, which is their sister city, and that was a really cool experience.
And Matsumoto, for anybody who's not aware, Matsumoto is the home of Yayoi Kusuma. Is that right? I think I've
I
been
think
there.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and they have a
And
big museum there, and it's a
oh,
great castle. It's a great place, actually.
yeah, Matsumoto's a really cool town, and it's similar to Salt Lake City. It's surrounded by these beautiful mountains. It's a cold winter town. They did the Olympics in '98 as part of the Nagano Olympics, and so when the mayors met during the Salt Lake Olympics, they had me, and that's I think somebody's major oversight that they had me on the job. They should have had somebody a lot better, but it was a great experience. And the big thing for me was I interpreted. The mayor of Salt Lake at the time, named Rocky Anderson, a super sustainability advocate, by the way. He made some joke, and I interpreted it, and everybody laughed at the same time, and I was like, I have just succeeded. Like, I made it happen. Like, that was a really cool experience developing.
That's great. And that's so hard to do, right? Like humor across languages.
Oh yeah.
I remember years ago, my kids and I, we went to watch one of the Monsters. It was like Monsters Inc. or one like a Pixar film animation, but they only had the dub version, which quite often happens. But we like, oh well, we'll try it. My kids are native, right? Because they grew up here. And then, but we were the only ones in the audience laughing at the American jokes, even though it was in Japanese. It was the humor that didn't translate, right?
Oh
That was
yeah,
really
referential
interesting.
humor, idiomatic humor. It can be so hard. That's one of the fun interpreting challenges is how can I get this joke across? Or do I just there's a famous story, and I don't know how true it is, but apparently a person came to speak in Russia from Japan, and the Russian interpreter was standing next to them speaking to this audience. And the Japanese person made a joke that made no sense in Russian, and the interpreter he just said a joke, everybody laugh, and the audience laughed. Like that was like the last resort interpreter skill you can deploy if a joke's just not going to make sense.
Oh
Just tell
my
them to laugh.
gosh. I saw a really interesting show about translators, interpreters in the time of Trump, and
Mm.
how translating into other languages based on what he says is really tricky, because if you translate it exactly what he's saying, it makes you look bad.
Oh yeah.
Have you had have you had that kind of experience?
Oh, well, I've been lucky enough to not have to interpret anything that Trump said, and, and hope I never have to. Because he'll leave out the subject of what he's talking about. He'll leave out, the object. There's just so much confusion in what he's saying, and what a lot of speakers do. But he's just a disaster in terms of everything. So I would never try.
Yeah, but even in Japanese, from Japanese to English, you were working in politics for a while.
Hmm.
You must have had some tricky points where it was kind of it's a call. Like, how do you translate that for the English speaker from the Japanese side, or how do you translate that into Japanese from the English side? Like, how do you make that judgment as an interpreter?
Oh well, working in politics, I rarely I interpreted a little bit and translated a little bit, but I was almost never anything except another grunt in the office. So a few times my politician boss had me interpret for him, and those can be a little bit nerve-wracking if it's an international interaction of some kind. Definitely you had to make judgments about how to interpret something or how to make it more diplomatic or not, or whatever. But I haven't done a ton of political interpreting actually. Yeah, it's diplomatic type interpreting. You have to be super accurate and super neutral as the interpreter. But I find that my personality is where I want to be interventional. I want to intervene and make the interaction better. So I'm more oriented to business for sure.
That's so interesting. I've heard that from interpreters and translators, that when they have expertise in a certain field, it's really hard to hold back from adding advice
Oh yeah.
as a
Oh,
part
totally.
of the interpreting translation, which is not technically part of your job, right?
Exactly. The interpreter job is very, very important, and in a diplomatic situation between countries or whatever, your neutrality and your just objectivity is super important. But yeah, I'm not that kind of person. I need to I'm like, wait, but I can make a contribution here and make this thing better. How can I not? Like I can't resist that. So
That's so hard not to jump in. You're like, how about doing, oh, wait, I'm not supposed to do that.
yeah, when people are misunderstanding each other, especially, person on this side says A, person on this side says C, and if you can just add B to it, they'll totally understand each other, but that's not your job. That can be impossible to resist for me.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is really tricky.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about your TV show that you're on. Can you introduce that to us?
Yeah, so I have two TV shows. Both of them are on JCOM, which is a national Japanese provider of cable TV. The one show is called Hachioji Jinzukan, and that is like the taxonomy of Hachioji people. So the point of the show is to interview a person who does something interesting, and the person can live or work or study in our city of Hachioji, which is just west of Tokyo. And we basically just ask them what they do and what they're all about and why they do it. So we'll talk to people who run Kodomo Shokudo, which is like a free cafe for kids to come eat at if they're disadvantaged, or it could be somebody that is the head of the Chamber of Commerce, or it can be a singer or a songwriter or an artist. All these kinds of different kinds of people that live in Hachioji. We interview them. I interview them for 20 minutes, and then the show is broadcast for a week on JCOM. It's really cool. It's a really cool chance to introduce the variety of people that live in the city and what they do.
Is it possible for people to watch that if they don't have Japanese TV?
Yeah, that show, they usually upload the old episodes to YouTube about a month after they've broadcast. So YouTube, if they search for the name of the show in Japanese, I guess I could chat it to you. But yeah, it's if they search that, then they'll see lots of my episodes on YouTube.
Okay.
That's the one show. The other show is called Tsunagaru News, and Tsunagaru means like to connect. And Tsunagaru News is a news show that's broadcast daily on weekdays on JCOM all around Japan, and there's a local regional version for each area. And basically, the point of the show is to tell people what's happening locally, especially with relation to COVID-19. That it was created after COVID-19 started. And basically, we're just telling people what's going on in their communities, how different businesses and people and groups are coping and helping each other. And that's a really cool TV show, too.
That's awesome. Louise Poppy says, hello, JJ. Hello, Derek. Hi, Louise. Thanks for joining.
Hello.
She says, my son lives in Hachioji and she follows you on Twitter.
Oh my goodness, that's so cool. I've Louise Puppy. I've definitely seen her tweets. That's awesome. Um,
So
yeah, I would
Hachioji
love to meet.
is not too difficult to commute into Tokyo if you had to.
Yeah, it is on the Chuo line, which is just straight west out of central Tokyo, and about an hour from there you get to Hachioji. It's a commuter town at this point, but it's a nice place, right up against the mountains. It's where the mountains begin, and once you get into those mountains, you get pretty soon into Yamanashi Prefecture.
Oh, awesome. Yamanashi has a lot of beautiful nature and amazing onsens and food.
Yeah,
Is that right? Yeah, I always hear about Yamanashi.
definitely.
I have
Beautiful
to get there.
place.
Louise says, hope to meet you next visit.
Awesome. Please let me know if you come.
That's awesome.
Definitely.
I noticed you guys are back in studio. So you're not doing like online TV shows. You're actually doing it in the studio. Any changes since COVID?
Yeah, well, my interview show, Hachioji Jinzukan, used to be we would do it in the JCOM shop. JCOM does, like cell phones and stuff. So we would be in their shop, filming the show, but that completely got shut down by the company, and we were off air for a couple months, and now we do it all by Zoom. So it's a completely different show. It's basically like you and I are talking now.
Okay. Wow. Is big transitions for, of course, any kind of media during COVID, right?
Right, and the news show is done from a studio, but there's like a whole social distancing protocol for myself and my co-anchor. And the Zoom one, I'm in the studio, but they're in their house or whatever. So it is a big transition. There's that tiny timing difference between being in person, right? And so it can be a little bit challenging,
And
especially
then,
for older guests. They're
yeah,
not used to
for
being on Zoom.
sure. And then, different from what we're doing right now with live streaming, they would probably cut out when their cat jumps into the frame or on the computer, which,
Yeah. Not only that, but
or
oh yeah, that could
kids,
be
kids
that could
coming
be
in.
part of it. And then that's almost fun. We had
Yeah.
a guest who owns a restaurant, and we could hear his kitchen banging around in the background. That was kind of cool. But one day last week, we filmed about 10 minutes of our 20-minute show, and realized the camera on me in the studio wasn't recording, and we had to like re-interview, which is so terrible. I
Oh
hate I,
no.
I hate not fresh interviews where I have to be like, oh, interesting, even though I just heard it.
Oh
So
no. Well,
yeah, yeah.
we have that sometimes because if there's noise in the background, I'll mute my mic. But because we're live, people usually tell me, "Joy, your mic's off." So that's nice. I can get back on and
The
catch people up. Erin says, "Have you ever lived in other places in Japan in the other than the Tokyo area?"
the furthest away from here I lived was Fuji City in Shizuoka, and but in my work I have to go to factories that make medical devices, which are usually in more rural areas because of the low cost of doing that. So I've spent a ton of nights in Tosu in Saga Prefecture, not far from Fukuoka City. I've spent a lot of time in Akita in Odate. I've spent a ton of time in Niigata, Gosen City. So a lot of different places in Japan. I've spent some time, but yeah, living, it's been Fuchu, Kawasaki, Fuji City in Shizuoka, Kamioka in Yokohama, and Kichijoji area, and now Hachioji for 16 years.
That's interesting. I mean, some people might not think that doing medical interpreting or translation is interesting, but I sometimes do editing. So I don't do the translation part, but when they get it into English, often they need an extra edit. So
Okay.
I'll do editing and narration quite often.
Mhm. Oh,
Um,
cool.
so I recently did a project with a medical company, and they were doing an international product,
Mm.
kind of a collaboration with developing countries to develop technology and export it and communicate online and stuff. And I thought, wow, that's really exciting and very connected to sustainability.
Mm.
So I think a lot of the stuff you're doing, you must see that a lot of connections with helping people in Japan and abroad, as well as maybe reducing waste for the environment or something. Is that right?
Yeah, big time. One big aspect of medical devices and pharmaceuticals, obviously, especially in the U.S., pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies have a long way to go in both sustainability and in just being less evil. But the cool thing I get to do is help them be more compliant and safer, and, make better products. So um, I always say to my clients, would you be okay with what you're making being used on your mom or your daughter or your your family? And that is the perspective I try to bring to it. Like, I'm helping companies. Like, one of my big customers is Terumo. They make thermometers, they make needles for injection, they make a ton of products. And it's cool to see when my family gets one of the devices I've helped to do quality control with, used on them. It's a
That
cool thing.
that is true. Years ago, and this is it's kind of a strange conversation, but years ago I was in the UK and I got an IUD.
Mm.
And an IUD was from Japan, and I'm in the UK. And the doctor's telling me, which made me really worry. He's like, I actually can't read this. Can you, because you're from Japan, can
It's
you
in
read it?
Japanese.
And I was like,
Oh my goodness.
but you know how to use it, right?
He shouldn't get the instructions for use in English. That's
Yeah,
that's
but
scary.
then he had me do a little bit of translation for him, and I was like, okay, basically, I hope you understand how IUDs work, and
Oh my
yeah,
goodness. Yeah, that's one scary thing is the instructions sometimes get translated a bit roughly. Uh,
yeah.
but with sustainability, a big thing right now, that you may have heard of or you may not have. So when medical devices, like, let's say a needle, they're going to inject you with this one-time disposable needle. The needles themselves are tough to recycle and to handle because they're obviously biohazard. But the other thing is, when they sterilize them, they use what's called ethylene oxide a lot of the time. And ethylene oxide is something that kills all of the microbial, bacteria, everything that might be on a needle, so that when they inject you, you don't get really, really sick, because you could be, death is the worst. Is one of the possibilities if it's not sterilized right. But the problem is, ethylene oxide is also not a great thing for the environment when they release it after they use it to sterilize. And in the US, they're doing a lot to get rid of it or to neutralize it before they release it into the environment. So medical device companies are having to spend money to get better at sterilizing things, and that's a big sustainability thing right now.
Yeah. Do you find that Japanese companies are kind of being brought up to higher standards because of international collaboration?
I think so, for
Yeah.
sure. The international, especially EU has probably been the leader on it. They have enacted standards so that if you're selling a medical device in Europe, not only do you, as the company that sells the product, but also all of your suppliers, upstream from you, they have to also say be lead free in their materials, and they have to be environmentally sound more and more. So it's a cool effect, because a company selling in the EU might be a European company, but if they're buying something from Japan, they have to tell the Japanese factory making their thing, hey, you guys have to abide by all these rules, otherwise we can't sell in Europe. So it's a good effect, definitely. It's bringing Japanese companies up, for
That's
sure.
great. Yeah, I did a interview at Recology in San Francisco last year,
Mhm.
and he was saying I will never buy Japanese products because they're too much single-use plastic. And he's like, I also never want to visit Japan because I know they're still using plastic bags. And I was like, whoa, wow, like very strong. But of course, he's in the industry.
Hmm.
But it makes you realize that the image of a country, the image of Japan as a destination,
Hmm.
the image of Japanese products is all connected to how well they compete in terms of sustainability on an international standard, right?
Definitely. Definitely. You've probably heard of ISO standards for environmental, impact. And a lot of companies in Japan have become ISO certified, which is at least brings you to some level of environmental friendliness. But it can also kind of be gamed as a system, ISO. And so there are good things and bad things about it. The industry I'm in, medical devices, a really tough thing is disposable usually means safer. because when you reuse a medical device, especially one that includes anybody's, body fluids or anything, you have to be super duper sure that there is nothing remaining on that thing after you have, used it. So if you want to reuse something, it has to be so carefully cleaned. So with blood bags, for example, when you get a blood transfusion, that bag is usually disposable because uh, they used to use glass bottles, and those bottles would be cleaned, but making sure they were clean was hard. So I see a big back and forth, a big balance issue where they have to be so safe because safety is so important in medical devices, but at the same time, they're trying to be more environmentally friendly.
Yeah,
It's really hard.
it's really tough in terms of single-use plastic. That's
Hmm.
why I'm really hoping they will create a plant-based or biodegradable or burnable,
Hmm.
even less petroleum-based plastic. Because
Right.
if it's better for the environment, I mean, everything is burnt in Japan, even plastics.
Hmm.
So if it's something that's safer to burn and it acts like plastic, that would be a
Hmm.
huge advance for
Yeah, it
medical
would be.
supplies.
Exactly. And when a medical device company makes a product that's disposable, they basically put on their instructions, please follow local rules when disposing. That's all they can really say because it might go to Vietnam, it might go to the US, it might go to France, and all of those places are going to handle plastic differently when it's discarded. So there's a long way to go in making it more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, and for someone who does monthly cleanups on beaches,
Yeah,
we do find medical waste, and a lot of it is plastic, or wrapped in
yeah.
plastic, and that's pretty darn scary when you find it on the beach and there's little kids playing
Oh,
down on the
yeah.
beach. So
And
this is
and let me
something that
say,
needs to be handled.
your work in that is incredible, by the way.
Oh,
I've
thank
I've
you.
seen the tweets, and man, I love that. My philosophy being in Japan just overall is I want to be a contributor. I don't want to be the gaijin down the street. I just want to be I want to be seen as somebody who contributes to the community, right? And they don't think about nationality. And the way I see you working in Hiroshima is exactly that. Like, so it's super inspiring.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a
Yeah.
small effort and it makes such a tiny, tiny difference. But in terms of even my own feeling next time I go shopping, or
Yeah.
I think, do I need that thing in plastic? That's only single use. Maybe I'll choose that one. So as a educational or awareness thing, even for myself, it's really important to do.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't start really doing much on Twitter until like 2 years ago, and I started following a bunch of people in Japan, especially people who aren't originally from Japan, and it's been a huge influence on me. Just like seeing you talk about sustainability has totally changed how I thought about like, well, you know what? Like, I really do need to think about like myself and how much plastic I'm using or whatever. I've seen people who are really into bicycling and not using cars, and that's totally changed how I thought about using my cars. And so it's really cool to be influenced that way.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Thanks so
Yeah.
much. Molly B says, and Molly's in the States, unfortunately, Trump has gotten rid of a lot of industry standards, also a lot of eco and safety standards. Also, you're from Utah. A lot of the national monuments or huge public lands,
Oh, yeah.
he's gotten rid of the public lands, made them private. I mean, it's
Yep.
huge, huge problems.
It is. Like I'm from Utah. I grew up in a Mormon household, and my parents were conservative, but not like toxically so. Um, but the way I've thought about the Utah public lands over the years has changed a lot. I really like Edward Abbey. He's one of the early environmentalist authors writing about the desert, the West, and kind of how it's been developed and exploited, for minerals and things. And it's really changed the way I see it. And the more and more as I get older, I guess I'm 41, but as I get older, I think, wow, those spaces, those desert wilderness type spaces, like they're the value. Like extracting things from them is not the value. The fact that they exist is the value. that people can go be in those places and be affected by those places is so much more valuable than the one-time mineral you get out of it. And so it's really big to me. Yeah.
Definitely. It's like the whole idea of, oh, now we can drill in the Arctic because there's no ice. Let's just race towards the cliff, is what a lot of people
Yeah.
are saying. Just make money right now. And who cares about other people? Who cares about whether we have a chance for the future? It's horrendous that
It
anybody
is.
can think like that, right?
It's horrendous, but I mean, I have to start with myself because my way of thinking about it has only changed, over the last few years, let's say, or maybe 10 to 15 years, and I have to say, well, what was I like before I started thinking this way, right? And there's plenty I still need to do, so I can't really fault anyone until I've done a lot more personally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the way to do it, and I often say on this series, before I started on my own trying to make a living as trying to keep to my ideals but make a living on my own outside of the university system, I was much more idealistic when I was a university professor. I had a monthly income. I could be, whatever. Since I work for myself and working collaborative with companies and businesses, I have really come down to reality, and like if you can just make that small change, wow, amazing,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we are we are we are inevitably compromised as part of society, right? Like, so if you're living in society, you're probably compromising on something, working with a company that you don't totally agree with, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's always that.
But if you
Yeah.
can, even especially for big companies, if you can get them to change even their philosophy a tiny bit to even think about a more sustainable option, that's huge, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
absolutely.
before I was like, no, they need to change right now, but now I'm like, just think about it.
Right. And to make this advance, we need to, this is going to cost us this environmentally or sustainability wise, like that. This is just there's so much complexity to everything. Everything's so interconnected that you have to make little things where you can, I
Absolutely.
guess.
But I think now in this day and age, if you're talking about branding, if you're talking about how people see your brand of your company or of the leader of your company, you have to be more ethical. You
Yeah,
have to be more transparent and you have to make an effort to be
for
more
sure.
sustainable because that's what people care about. So
Exactly.
in terms of branding, it's certainly changed. The mindset has changed, right?
Yeah, the companies I work with are mostly public companies, and so they're feeling a lot of pressure. It's a good pressure, right?
Yeah.
For sustainability and for a lot of things, for advancing more women in their organizations and just all these things that Japan is seen as being behind on, and they are behind on in a lot of ways. Japanese companies are getting more and more pressure to advance in good ways.
And I
So I
think
think it's great.
social media also has really helped because social media adds a layer of transparency that they cannot hide behind greenwashing where they say they're doing
Yeah.
something but they're not doing it. So for example, you talked about hiring more women or advancing more women. Well, there's women who write on social media that that's not true or that is true and then they're listed as a black company or a blacklist or
Yeah,
something.
buraku kigyo, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is such a scary term. Like it sounds so racial, like immediately when you say a black company. Like, but yeah, companies get called out in Japan now too, right? Japanese Twitter users are definitely vocal, and a company can they say enjo suru, right? Start on fire, meaning they get totally slammed online for something bad that they do, and that's it's good accountability.
It is. It's like what you said about your mistakes in interpreting has spurred you to be a better interpreter. We hope that companies being called out for things they're doing wrong are thinking about it and changing and improving. That's the aim, right?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And you can just add a company now, right? So if you tweet at somebody online and there's a certain amount of attention to it, the company has to pay attention for sure.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about some of your amazing tweets that I'm a huge fan of your Twitter feeds. Let's talk about cats as God. How did this
Oh,
come
that's
about?
awesome. Yeah. So it's so funny because okay, so the long story short, there are these evangelical Christian signs around Japan that most people living in Japan have probably seen, I would say. They're placed on just random farmhouses, random walls when you're walking through a city or whatever. And basically, it's this really evangelical brand of Christians who were started by Americans living in Japan, and they started this Bible distribution society or something like that, where they go around and they ask people, "Can we put a sign on your house, that gives a Bible message?" And these aren't so the people in these houses and owning these walls aren't usually Christians. They're just like, "Yeah, sure, put up your sign if you want." And these signs say things like, the kingdom of God is at hand, or, you will be judged by God at the last day, or you can only be saved through Jesus Christ, these kinds of things. Having been a Mormon previously, I'm kind of agnostic these days religiously, but having experienced that, being a kind of Christian who was going around asking people to follow me, right? I see these signs, and so I'm very, sensitive to seeing them around. But anyway, these signs, a lot of them say kami on them, and the character for kami, as many people know in Chinese, is in Japanese easily changed to the katakana rendering of neko, or cat. So people in Japan seeing these signs, and these signs are kind of like a challenge to the reader, right? These signs are really strident. They're really kind of aggressive. They're like, God is not in your shrine, or they're kind of I would say over the top. I would say a little bit pushy. And so people, I think, in a reaction to that, have changed the kami character to neko, so that instead of saying God, it says cat. And the other day, and this is something I've always really loved, and I've seen these online. It's not usually that people change the physical sign, like they don't usually vandalize the sign, which is a crime in Japan. You wouldn't want to do that. They Photoshop them, right? So all these signs you can see online, and I made a thread of all of these Photoshopped signs. They make these really funny messages where it says, "Be reconciled with cat" instead of with God. And cats act like gods, right? Cats think they're gods, and so it's just a perfect bit of humor.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so funny. Believe in cat, catch, watch over us. Cat is but one cat.
Right, there
Um,
is only one cat that you must worship, right? And that's yours.
Believe in cat is the classic. Cat doth punish sin.
Right. I mean, and I made it the old school English. The King James version of the Bible is really old English, right? Like, "Be thou humble," or whatever. And so if you put the language that way with cat, it just really adds to the humor. So I translated a bunch of those and made a thread, and it was my most popular tweet ever. I was surprised at that.
It's
It really tickles me. It makes me just really laugh. And it seems like a lot of people liked that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you got 45,000, 4,500 likes and retweets or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it just went viral, didn't it?
I was surprised about that. It was a lot of fun. It was really satisfying.
Molly says, I like that. My cat sometimes thinks he's a god. And I think that's why it's so funny, right? Because cats are kind of like that.
Cats are
They,
totally, yeah, cats totally think they're gods. And so all of those messages, even though it sounds like we're making fun of the Christians that make these signs, it's not that. It's just saying it's just saying cats feel the same way that about this message, right? The kingdom of cat is at hand, is
yeah.
close at hand. Soon cats will rule the world.
Cats created heaven and earth, I mean,
That's right.
cat created man.
Exactly, exactly. We are all but dust that cats have
And then
organized.
in Japanese, I haven't seen any English websites that do this yet. Maybe we can talk to Sabrina Hassanali, who has a t-shirt company.
Ah, yeah.
But we don't see any of these available yet on English sites. But there's a bunch of Japanese sites that'll sell T-shirts and stuff. You suggested,
Yeah.
like if you search Google with
Hmm.
"cat is God," you'll get a bunch of these T-shirts and bags and things you can buy in Japanese, right?
Exactly. No, the most famous one is the be reconciled unto cat, neko to wakai seo, which in Japanese is just so funny. It's so good. Be ye reconciled with cat, because everybody wants to be reconciled with their cat, right? But cats are so aloof and like maybe I will, maybe I won't, kind of. It's just perfect. So yeah, you can get a T-shirt with that on it.
That's awesome. Aaron says, "Bow down to your cat." Yes, exactly.
Exactly, exactly.
I think we have this in common. You are a lover of derelict signs, old buildings,
Yeah.
moss. I love so many of your threads on Twitter.
Yeah, I love. I don't know what it is. I came to Japan for the first time in 1998, so not super long ago. So what that means is, when I see things that are older than that, I see a Japan that I wish I had been able to experience. So when I see old storefronts, or I see like those dilapidated type, buildings, the haikyo that a lot of people are interested in and take pictures of, like that really interests me. And I love moss. When moss is growing somewhere, I just get super excited about it. Probably because I grew up in a desert in Salt Lake. So when I see like signs of just spontaneous life, I'm like, wow, how is that possible? So there's just a lot of fascination from me on that. Yeah.
And then like you'll show old signs with interesting font and comment on that. Like that it's probably painted, but the font that they use for the Chinese characters or kanji is very different from usual.
Yeah, yeah, those really fascinate me. It's probably all wrapped up into the same like old Japan that I didn't get to experience firsthand. When I see remnants of that around, it makes me really like it just gives me some kind of feeling that's really cool. So if I see those like interesting fonts or rare fonts, everything's getting more and more homogenized in the world, right? Like there's a McDonald's everywhere. There's a in Japan there's a Yoshinoya everywhere, right? And it's all the same fonts. It's all the same like slick commercialism. And so when you see something that's not that, I guess it's interesting and encouraging.
Yeah. Aaron's asking, what's your Twitter handle? So it's on the screen right now. DWVCD. So
Exactly.
yeah,
I grew up in a city, a suburb of Salt Lake City called West Valley City, which is called WVC. So I wanted to just be 5 characters. So I went DW, which is Derek Westman, VCD. Anyway,
nice.
that's the handle.
And I saw this "Boys Be Ambitious" thread that you had or
Mm,
tweet,
mm,
and this is something that always came up when I was teaching at university, but I was only teaching women. And
mm.
so it's something that always annoyed me how all the
Yes.
old male professors would always say this story about Dr. Clark, is it, from
Hmm.
Hokkaido and boys be ambitious. And but then you introduced something which I didn't realize, that you can say ambitious in
Hmm.
katakana and it's understood. So
Yeah, thanks
that's
to
a good
This
insight.
Dr. Clark. He was apparently a professor at Amherst, I think, in Massachusetts, and he ended up in Japan somehow. You can look at his Wikipedia page, but if you search Clark Boys Be Ambitious, it'll show up, I'm sure. But yeah, he made this quote. He said this to the boys at the only boys school, I think, the boys only school he was teaching at, and it became a famous quote. So you can say ambitious. If you say ambitious, they might not understand it. But if you say ambitious, then most people get it. It's kind of cool.
That's
But I
good.
totally agree. I wish it had been everybody be ambitious,
People,
not boys. Yeah,
students
yeah.
be ambitious.
But there's the 1800s influence there, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's in a lot of junior high school textbooks, that story about Dr. Clark, right?
Exactly. It's funny that around Japan, if you go to cemeteries, there's almost always like a foreigner section of a big cemetery in Tokyo or whatever, and you can find these headstones of people that were here from England, from the U.S., from France, from all these places way back in the 1800s and things. You know, we think of ourselves kind of, I think, as pioneers sometimes when we're living in Japan, like as a non-Japanese person. You're like, oh wow, I've got to be the first foreigner to ever meet, ever see this or ever do this. But it's like, no, that these people were here in the 1800s, the 1600s, whatever, doing these things. So I just love that, like you see these monuments to people who had katakana names way, way back. And
That's
it's a cool thing.
wild. I like your thread about the local baseball team that you joined, but you guys have professional baseball uniforms.
Yeah, softball. I'm no baseball
Softball.
player. It's softball, but so yeah, I do a ton of like local things because I worked for a local politician. It got me introduced to all of these different people and organizations in Hachioji, and so just living in the neighborhood, I got invited to join the neighborhood softball team, and we play against other neighborhoods. And they gave me this full uniform. I had to go on YouTube to learn how to put on baseball stirrups because they're all complicated to put on. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun just to do regular people stuff with people, and not again to just be another guy as opposed to just being a special foreigner or whatever.
That's
Yeah, it's a lot of.
awesome. I love your old school restaurant, like the menu at the tonkatsu place on the fan.
Oh yeah, that was cool the other day. That was up in Fukushima Prefecture. In Koriyama, there was this tonkatsu place that everybody said I needed to go eat at, and when I went there, you open up a fan and it said everything in Japanese on it.
That's
What
a cool
ramen.
idea. I love that.
Yeah, right. Smart guy.
Quite
This
quite
master.
often, people, in tourism, they'll say, "Oh, we need to have an English menu," and I always say, "But isn't that hard because you're hand writing your menu and you often change it by season or change it every week based on specials." So translating, it's not just a translation. It's not a
Yeah,
quick job. It's something that's ongoing. If there was an app that could better understand the written kanji, I think that's a hurdle for visitors, right?
totally. Yeah, it's true. I mean, you can if it's printed, right? If it's printed, everybody can do the Google Translate with their camera on their phone. Most people have that. But yeah, the handwritten stuff it is tough. It is tough, and I'm always torn. Like, how much do I want to help a restaurant localize, or how much do I
Yeah,
want just people to experience not knowing what
yeah.
things say? One of my favorite experiences was in Korea. After I'd become really fluent in Japanese, I went to Korea several times with an interpreting thing, and I loved how I went into Korean restaurants and there was like sometimes there might be a picture on the wall, but almost never. And I would just have to like look at other people's tables and be like, "Can I get some of that?" You know? That
Yeah,
was kind of a cool thing. I don't know.
yeah. That's the best way, I think. You just, as long as you don't have any dietary requirements, just look
Yeah,
around
that's
and say, "Oh, I'll have one of them. Oh, that smells good. I'll have that." Or, "What do you
yeah,
recommend?"
yeah, I
Just
really
give
like
me
that.
this is my budget. Can you give me some food that'll be in that budget? And usually you'll get a great selection.
Yeah.
You have another story. You asked for a small rice, and
What's that?
you asked for a small rice, and he gave you
Oh, yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
in a kiddie bowl.
Yeah, you get well, it was packed though. It was like a full it was the normal bowl of rice and it was totally packed in. And he was clearly just being the master. He was being the dominant figure in this situation. Like, yeah, I'm like, just give me a tiny bit of rice, and he gives me, he's like, this is the minimum amount of rice I can give a customer. Basically, was what he was saying. He was a character. He had his whole system down. He had his whole philosophy. You could tell it was a
That's
fun thing.
that's awesome.
Yeah, I like
Um,
putting myself in their hands that way.
no, no, that's the best. You often get more value than if you had tried to order for yourself, for sure.
I think so.
Let's talk about tofu donuts. This is a
Oh yeah.
real find.
Oh
Wow.
yeah. Yeah, there's a tofu place, a tofu manufacturer, a tofu shop here in Hachioji. So there's a place called Ura Takao. Takao-san, Mount Takao is a famous mountain in our community. It's the most climbed mountain in the world, I think they even claimed. Like 3 million people climb it every year because it's so dang easy to climb, and it's so close to Tokyo. So at the foot of this mountain but kind of the backside of the mountain is this tofu shop. They have a water source that's just straight out of like this beautiful spring, this beautiful perfect water. And as most people know, if they know about tofu, water is kind of one of the big factors in making tofu good. Is really good water. So these guys make really good water, or make really good tofu, but they make from the tofu. What's it called? There's this there's this material called okara, which is like a really low calorie but really filling, like, and you can use it almost as a flour, almost as a grain. And so they use that to make these donuts. They fry these donuts with okara, and it's this as healthy as it gets donut. It's not super healthy, but it's as healthy as it gets. This
So
light, sweet donut.
is it vegan? I was looking at it thinking it might be vegan,
I
but
bet it is,
yeah, because
because the
it's
oil
hard
is
to
vegetable
get
oil.
hard to get
Yeah.
vegan donuts. And I
Oh yeah.
love finding tofu makers because we eat a lot of tofu. We're a vegetarian vegan family. And we eat a lot of tofu, but it's all the plastic packaging that I hate, all that single plastic. So I'm always searching for tofu makers where they might let me take my own container and refill it.
Oh yeah, that's true. Tofu is exactly that way. It's unfortunately always in disposable plastic. You're right. Like okara is the soy pulp, is what they call it. It's this leftover byproduct after you make tofu. But yeah, the cool thing about though a local tofu shop, as maybe you've experienced, is if you get to know them and you go buy tofu there a few times, I bet if you show up with a container of your own, they'll totally scoop some in and just charge you whatever they charge for donut,
Yeah.
for
Or
normal.
even if I have two containers and I leave one there and they're happy for me to do like a weekly order or
Oh
even a
yeah.
daily order, I would be whatever they're willing to do. I would be very happy with that. So I'm still searching. If anybody knows a tofu maker in Hiroshima, please let
Yeah.
me know because I want to search it out.
Seriously, there's
Yeah.
got to be one.
There
And the
has to
same thing,
be. There
the
has
same
to
thing with
be.
natto. There's a local natto store in Hachioji, and they wrap their tofu in what's called kyogi, which is super thin sliced wood,
Oh,
and it has a
awesome.
breathability. So the natto actually stinks less because it is, of course, fermented soybeans. But they wrap it in this super thin sliced wood, which is how all of Japan used to do it.
Yeah.
And it has a natural breathability and all these cool properties. Plus, it's totally biodegradable. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a cool thing.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And even if like a lot of supermarkets, they have the sushi tray or the onigiri tray or the deli, the Japanese deli foods in a reusable or recyclable tray, even that would be better, right? There's
Yeah. If you could do like my tray instead of like my bagu, as they always say, your own bag.
exactly,
It'd be cool if you could
exactly.
do your own trays. Like that is something that I just thought, I haven't thought about in my whole life until just now when you talk about it. Like that
Yeah.
would be something that would be cool if people could make it happen. It is again though, like not as maybe serious as the medical device field, but it is a safety thing usually, or at least that's how they sell it, right?
Right.
You
Yeah.
you 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 need this safety of a pristine container every
Well,
time.
now that restaurants are open again, and I'll often go, like we went to a beautiful buffet restaurant the other day, had so many amazing foods, eating on beautiful ceramic plates, drinking from glasses. Everything was reusable except the waribashi, the disposable chopsticks. And I was like,
Yeah.
why waribashi? Why not reusable chopsticks? And they're like, because the image is it's cleaner. Well,
Yep.
we know it's not clean. It's actually got formaldehyde in a lot of the cheap ones. Like
Uh,
your high quality restaurant, you had high quality reusable chopsticks in paper wrapping, like a lot of
mhm.
high quality restaurants would be better, right? And they're
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
oh, naruhodo, that's true. Like there's just some modern conveniences in Japan that if you go back to the way things used to be, even 10 years ago, 10
Hmm.
years ago, it was better. It was more reusable. It was more sustainable, right? So
Yeah,
very
it's a shame,
interesting.
right? That's one thing I love about Korea. The chopsticks in Korea at a restaurant are almost always metal.
Metal. Yeah.
They're eternally reusable. I mean, I imagine some of the chopsticks you use at an old restaurant in Korea have been around for just decades. It's super cool that way. the waribashi as a cleaner alternative, definitely that needs to change here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think traditionally it used to be the idea of waste wood, waste Japanese wood. And that might have been the case a long time ago, but it's not the case now. A lot of the wood is
Okay.
imported.
Yeah, it's like from
And
Indonesia and Malaysia and
even from
Pakistan.
rainforests, sometimes you're like, why?
Totally.
Awful. We got some comments here. Louise said, what did they use before plastic? Yeah, good question. I'm always asking that about like when we do beach cleanup, we always find the plastic tubes from the oyster industry.
Mm,
So what did they use before? Probably bamboo or wood. Let's go back to that because
I
this is a
guess.
huge problem, right?
I would guess that
Um,
was the case.
yeah.
Yeah.
Aaron says, can you describe the taste of the donuts?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I'd love to. Um, Imagine like, so you know how there are categories of donuts, at least in my mind, that are like more dessert, and there are categories of donuts that are maybe a little more towards like a food, like a meal donut, right? These donuts from the tofu place Mineo. Mineo is the name of the people, Mineo-san. They make these donuts that are just very lightly sweet, so they're very much the meal donuts category. And they have a slight crispness because they do fry it in oil, vegetable oil, I think. And it's just a lovely little crunch, and then a spongy, just perfectly spongy, lightly sweet donut. Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
I highly recommend
Sounds
it.
good. I went to Mr. Donut the other day, and Mr. Donut usually doesn't have anything for vegans. You, as a vegetarian, you'll find something. A lot of the donuts have egg and dairy in it, but they just started an allergy-free donut, which you can get frozen, and then you can go make it home. And it's made from rice flour, so it's also gluten-free,
Mm.
and coconut milk. So
Oh, cool.
they are starting slowly to get the idea that having plant-based options helps everybody and it helps the image. So
I think finally there's getting to be, maybe we're close to the critical mass of vegans and vegetarians in Japan where it's good business to offer something. I think we're not there yet, but I think we're getting closer. And I'm not a vegan or vegetarian at all, but I would love for there to be options because when
yeah,
people visit me in Japan, I always have to help people find gluten-free and carb-free and gluten everything else.
exactly. I was predicting that this would be the year because of the Olympics, that there would be a big push
Good
towards
point.
developing Japan towards the international standard, right?
Hmm.
And even though the Olympics didn't happen, I think the momentum was starting. So
Everybody was getting ready, right? All these things people were getting ready for, like putting English on their labels and stuff. It all happened because it had to happen, months in advance,
yeah.
and it's a good change either way.
Yeah, for sure. Erin said, how is that allergy-free Mr. Donut? Yummy. It was very plain and very bland, but it
Uh,
reminded me of Coco's Ichibana, the curry shop chain.
mhm.
And they started years ago with a packet allergy-free curry. That
Ooh,
if you say you could order the allergy-free curry, my kids and I used to do it, and it would come in a hot packet and then
mm,
you would just get your rice served and you would have to open and put your own curry on, which was allergy free. But
wow.
now look at Kokozichi. They have loads of vegan options.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's cool.
like ready made hot off the menu. So it's
And that probably
it's a
helps
start.
them. It probably helps them starting out in India. They actually started out in India, and they for sure have to be, vegetarian. Some options they don't do beef, I'm sure. And they probably have a halal version because there are a
Yes.
lot of Muslims in India. So that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you notice this with companies which are based in other parts of Asia. Malaysia, Taiwan have huge plant-based demand, right?
Yeah.
So that helps a lot.
And I think one thing that's influenced Japan that direction has been that so many Indian, Nepal, South Asian restaurants have opened up every single place in Japan, right?
Yeah.
And they've almost always got like a vegetarian at least option.
Vegetarian, but vegan is very hard
Yeah,
because
yeah,
there's a lot of dairy and a lot of butter
definitely.
in the
Yeah,
curries.
ghee is important in Indian food, sure. So
Yeah.
makes sense.
Shibus, thanks for joining, says being vegan is what makes me afraid to go back to Japan. Few vegan options. Yeah, it's frustrating, but it is getting better. And if you're
Yeah.
in Tokyo, it's definitely a lot easier. But even in cities like Hiroshima, it's not impossible. You can find a lot of good options.
And even if you don't like some of the things that are happening on English language Twitter in Japan, what I've seen just naturally by following a bunch of people is there are a lot of people who give information on like where you can get vegan stuff, where you can get vegetarian stuff. So follow a bunch of English speakers on Twitter is my advice on
Yeah,
that.
that's great advice. Like us.
Yes, that's right. Not me. I'm not a source of vegan information, but
Oh,
I
you
see a
have
lot of them. I'm
some.
like,
You
wow,
have
okay,
some.
cool. I need to remember that.
But I want to talk. We just have a couple more minutes about your Sento insights because we did a talk with a documentary filmmaker the other day, and he interviewed a guy running a Sento, and they are dying out like crazy, really fast in Japan, especially now during the coronavirus. You had an example about a Sento in your area, and the locals rallied to keep it open.
Yeah, it was really cool. This is maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, but Sento, one of three existing in Hachioji, and Hachioji is a city of 580,000 people. It was one of three left, and they said we're going to shut down because we're not making a lot of money, and the guy's getting old or whatever, and people super rallied about it, and they got the city to even subsidize this Sento because a Sento in a time of disaster when nobody has any water, for example, or nobody has bath facilities, can be a super valuable resource. And it's also a resource for people who live in less than ideal conditions, people who don't have homes at all, or people who live in really basic homes that don't have baths, which is something in Japan, which
Yeah,
happens in Japan. And so Sento are actually a really big community resource. So these people saved
definitely.
the Sento, and it still is going on. It was a really cool story.
That is awesome. That's great to hear.
Hmm.
It's so funny when I hear of young people who find great priced accommodation in Tokyo, and then they go there to realize there's no bath, there's no shower. Like it's super reasonable because there is no shower. There's only a toilet, and
Hmm.
you either wash your hair in the sink or you go to your local Sento. And so it is something that really supports lower income people,
Hmm.
which you don't realize, right? But
Yeah, people don't look at the aspects of poverty in Japan, and one of them is that there are still plenty of homes or places to live in Japan that don't have baths in them. I'd say 60, 70 years ago, maybe the average home didn't have its own bath, potentially. I mean,
wow.
you see, that's why bathhouses were everywhere, is because people generally bathe outside their home,
Yeah.
at least at some point.
And it's kind of coming back into fashion, but when I go in the countryside, people have to light a fire under the bath to make it hot,
Mm,
right?
my
And it's
goodness.
kind of coming back into fashion, that
Mm,
idea that you don't need a big water heater, that you just make a fire and you heat your own bath. But doing that habit is kind of like a nostalgic, cool thing to do. Like
mhm.
even at guest houses, they get the visitors to help light the fire for the bath. And man, it's really hot when you get
Cool.
in.
Yeah, that's the thing. The adjustment capability is definitely
Woo!
not what we have, but I like that. I
Yeah,
like that about even just the water heaters in Japan. I like that they're on demand rather than heating a giant tank of water all day for no reason.
yeah.
I mean, that's
Well,
cool.
well, ours actually saves energy because it only heats it at night when energy to buy is cheap, and
Ah,
then
yeah.
it keeps it. So we have a limited amount of hot water throughout the day, but that actually is more energy efficient. But yeah,
I love that. Sustainability wise, I mean, gathering available firewood just around, I would assume that's maybe better than, tanking liquid natural gas across the ocean to come to Japan at least. I don't know all the aspects. There's
yeah.
carbon in both, but still.
No, it seems like a good option. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much. That was really fun.
Oh, thank you. It was really fun, and thanks everybody that watched. It was awesome.
We'll have to catch up again in a few months when you have more interesting tweets to talk about.
All right, I will feel that pressure to keep them coming. Thanks
That's
so much for having
awesome.
me.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks Shubus and Aaron. You guys came over from Hiko Simon's channel. Thank you so
Oh,
much for joining.
thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have Hiko Simon this week Friday.
Oh,
We're
cool.
gonna
He's
we're
awesome.
we're gonna do number 2 of What the Sustainable News Japan. Yeah, that's our new
Cool.
series.
Yeah, he's a great follow, everybody.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Louise. Thank you, Molly. Thanks, everybody, for joining today, and have a great day. Thank you so much, Derek.
Thanks. See ya.